Good morning. Right off the bat, I just want to say I got a chance to meet Vine Life through the volunteers that help set up the prayer and reflection spaces for the Resound gathering that you guys hosted. And and my second experience with Vine Life has been this morning, which I wept through most of the worship. I just sort of was a big bawling baby. I have to say two things. One, if I lived here, this would definitely be my church. And two, if you're present in the room and you helped in any way with the setup of the prayer spaces, can you stand up? Just stand up really quickly, because you guys did an amazing job, and I thank you so much for every little bit of it. You guys can sit down now. I mean, it was like worker army ants, just the way, with quality and with patience, they just did an outstanding job, which says something, because when it comes to prayer room setup, I can be a little my precious with it, but but they endured my surliness with grace and a good attitude. My occasional meltdowns, they kept it together for me. And so I just wanted to give honor to the volunteers, the young and the old, because kids actually helped out quite a bit as well. Yep, this would definitely be the church I'd come to. This would be it. I kid you not. Over in Chichester, England, there were a bunch of young people who, were wanting to do great things, and had attempted some things, and knew that the things that they had tried, they knew that their efforts lacked prayer. I mean, they had read stories in Scripture around the power of it, and the things that they attempted to do were good, but they knew that it sort of lacked prayer and the power of it behind it. And so they decided that they were going to hunker down and pray before they launched and did another thing, or envisioned or dreamed into another thing, that they were going to just stop and pray. But the problem was, every last one of them were really bad at prayer. I mean, really bad at prayer. Praying 10 minutes seemed like a huge deal. It's like, what do you have to say after 5 minutes? That level of bad at prayer. I mean, they loved God and whatnot, but and their sort of experience with prayer was not uncommon for them. They had experienced in their region, prayer meeting was the least attended meeting of any part of a church meeting that was offered across the various denominations, and their experience of prayer was, 8 old ladies in the church basement, in the circle with the folding chairs. and admittedly, they just found it boring, and they just didn't, there was no excitement around it. And so this was a big sacrifice to say that, okay, we're just going to pray first and invite God into what we were doing. And they decided to use the model of the Moravians. They had heard about the Moravians and their praying nonstop, OMG, for 100 years. That's really something. They decided to use the model of the Moravians, where they set aside a dedicated space, and the crew would sign up for hour-long time slots, and everybody chipped in to cover 24 hours a day. And they found what was, for all intents and purposes, just a big storage closet. And they filled it with all kinds of creativity, art and paint, and what you guys would probably consider weird music, and liturgy that was interactive. You could get your hands on it, where it was it touched all 5 senses, and so the room was, it was just highly visual and stimulating and engaging, and people signed up for hour-long slots, and nobody really knew what to expect. I think there was a bit of intrepidation because, after all, prayer was really boring. And how in the world are they going to pray for a whole hour? It really just seemed impossible. But people signed up, and they made their way to the prayer room. And the first guy, I got a chance to hear the testimony of the first guy that went into the prayer room, describing his hour. And he was talking about how, even amidst all of that creativity, the first 20 minutes, were really boring. He just, didn't quite know what to do or how to kick this thing off. And these aren't kids that were just born again, and these are kids who raised up in the faith. But then, he sort of relaxed and just let himself just come in as a newbie and explore the stations and not judge them or think about what it could have been or what it should have been, or just explore the stations with a heart turned toward God. And then he talked about how profoundly God showed up for him at the back half of that time, that he signed up for another slot. And so the first prayer room in Chichester, as the time slot started to fill up, as kids started to lock themselves in alone with God to see what happened, well, God showed up and started to do some pretty wild things in terms of presence and healing and some transformations and deliverances and different kinds of freedom and speaking clear words. But I think the thing that was most profound that God did in that room was he took people who were bad at prayer and found it boring and stirred in them a kind of revival for prayer. That they were discovering that prayer could be this extraordinary, interesting, interactive thing that engaged, all of their senses. It's not that they were pleasure seekers in this. It's just they discovered fresh, new ways to engage in conversation with God, and God was meeting them in that. And for so many of them, for the first time, that they just became addicted to this thing called prayer. And there were a lot of repeat offenders in terms of signing up for time slots, even after you're already done your time slot. And so after the first week, they just kept going. And of course, word got out how God was on the move, even among people who went into the prayer room dragged by their friends, who said, you just got to get in this space. Yeah, I know you don't believe in God, but you just got to get in here. And even people who weren't followers of Christ were talking about, they definitely felt a presence in the room. Now, some not people who weren't your followers of Christ, that presence sort of freaked them out and they didn't want to ever go in there again. But, it freaked them out. Said, I don't want to be anywhere near that room. But for some who weren't yet followers of Christ, they that the sense of the presence or the peace that was in the room, it was a compelling on-ramp for them to explore, well, God, if you're real, then these are the questions I have, and these are the things that I want to talk to you about. And so stories of salvation were quite common in those early days, and stories of salvation are quite common here 20 years later as a movement has been praying nonstop, as word got out from that original prayer room of how God was on the move, and somebody scribbled a poem on the wall, something God had spoken to them in that space. That poem went viral, and as somebody who was in the original prayer room spoke about it at some conference not that long ago, churches and groups and individuals just said, we'll join you, we'll pick up a week, we'll pick up a month, we'll pick up and it just sort of 6 months later, went all around the world. And so the praying nonstop became this collaborative effort. And even today, the kind of stories that were birthed in the early prayer room are the same kind of stories that are being birthed as Lutherans and Mennonites and Baptists and Charismatics and Pentecostals. Yes, even Jehovah Witnesses and Seventh-day Adventists. Yes, I mean, it's just this broad swath of those various rivers and streams across the body of Christ who sort of take up this this passing of the baton, clear out their own storage closet and fill it with that which touches all the senses, and for a season invite their faith communities to sign up for a time slot, lock themselves in alone with God and see what happens. And God has been faithful. You know, this is a bona fide trend. After 20 years, God has been faithful to show up in those spaces all around the world and all around the nation in so many similar ways that he showed up in those early days in that first prayer room. So, you know, I think we're onto something. Is it everything? No. Is it something? You better believe it. And so God was clearly in a mood, really, in 1999. I think it was September 5th of 1999 when he birthed this prayer movement that would be called 24/7, because he actually birthed three, was it three? I think it might have been five, but three that I know of, significant prayer movements, you know, in that same month, in that same week, and on that same day. One of them was 24/7 prayer, which he just shoved into every crevice of the movement early on, this ethos of creativity and interactivity and a focus on hosting one-on-one encounters, you know, with God. Another movement he birthed on the same day became what you guys know as the International House of Prayer. He used creativity through that wing with the musicians and the psalmists and the singers and the writers of songs, and gave them a focus of corporate prayer, worship, and intercession. And both streams, both movements became global movements, and both movements have been praying nonstop since the early days of their existence. And so clearly God was in some kind of mood that morning when he woke up. He's like, I think I feel like prayer rooms today. I'm just going to have some fun on that regard. And here, when I thought about the Moravian model and how they had been praying for 100 years, you know, the reason that they even started praying was because things were going haywire in the camp. Oh, they had this great vision, almost utopian. We love God. We want to find a place where we can exercise our faith and freedom and really go hard after God together. They found a guy who would loan them some land to go and do that thing. And they're like, this is going to be great. You know, we're free from persecution. We can live out our vision to be a Christian community. Let's do it. Oh, they were so excited. But the problem is they were humans. And they were religious humans. So those are two strikes against them already. And so they began to try to live out this dream, and the more they lived into it, the more they kept running into trouble. Factions and disagreements and divisiveness and gossip and backbiting, and people who loved God and wanted to live in Christian community, but they just had trouble. And it had crescendoed to such a degree, you know, certain factions were threatening to leave. I mean, they tried everything. They tried to committee that thing, because, you know, that's what you do. You give it a good old committee to problem solve. Look into this, research this, come up with some solutions. We're people of God. We should be able to come up with some solutions to some of these problems. None of the efforts of the committee succeeded in anything except for making it worse. So they finally, after trying really everything that they knew to do as disunity and disharmony were crescendoing in the camp. You know, you can almost imagine that some guy in the back of the last row by the door raising his hand and saying, you know, I know that, you know, I'm not as spiritual as you guys are, and, you know, but what if we just prayed? You know, that guy in the back that, eventually raises his hands and says, what, maybe, it's all right if you don't like this idea, it's all right, it's probably silly anyway, but what if we just stopped all that and just prayed? And for some reason, that resonated, particularly since all the big wigs had tried everything else. And they're like, all right, well, let's do that then. Let's give that a go. Let's lean all in and just go for it. And that's where they came up with this model of taking a dedicated space and everybody take a time slot, and we're just going to pray. We're going to lock ourselves in alone with God and just pray. And God showed up, and revival entered the camp. And one of the things that community began to be known for was so great and so fierce a love and so profound a unity, sacrificial and beautiful. And it was so empowering that they just kept praying. It's like, why stop? They just kept praying. And as they kept praying, God began to continue to transform heart and transform lives. It was out of the Moravians that the modern missional movement was born. And it was just an extraordinary thing. It's just an extraordinary thing. And so back with the 24/7 prayer movement, as word got out that God was on the move, and God sneezed and the movement went viral, and there were prayer rooms in the back of clubs and pubs and on naval bases and on college campuses and on church campuses and in tents, and just pop-up prayer rooms and vans and in trucks and U-Haul trucks just. And the consistency of the testimonies that were born in those spaces, God was clearly having himself some fun. And so I got hooked into the prayer movement when God, it still irritates me to think about it. Mitch talked about this last night when I had been a part of a church plant, and I was planning to be a pastor for the rest of my days in that church plant. But God had other ideas as he gave me an open vision. And the first thing that was communicated in that vision was that he wanted not just temporary prayer spaces, that he wanted permanent prayer spaces. He wants something, something that wasn't going to end in a week or a month, that he wanted a public place where whomsoever will could come in, and the space would host the encounter one-on-one between God and the objects of his passion. And in that particular download that I got, it was filled with creativity. It was filled with the craftsmanship of artists and song makers, and the room was filled with paint, and the prayer stations track the core values of Jesus, the kingdom ethos to help engage in conversation with what's going on in your own heart, and help you have conversation with God about what's going on in the world we live in. I mean, the document, it wasn't like, the building of, Noah's Ark or the temple, but, it was clear he wanted it to be a feast, a visual and a sensual feast for whoever came in that room, no matter where they were on the spiritual landscape. And so we did the best we could and found ourselves in old Mechanics Bay that some guy was renting out in a place that sat between corporate America. It was near uptown or downtown. It sat between corporate America and the hood. You look in one direction, you see the city skyline. We were a banking industry. You look in the other direction, you saw drug dealers. You saw the transvestite prostitutes on the corner. You saw a neighborhood that was listed as fragile inner city neighborhood. You were just between these two worlds. And we rented out the Mechanics Bay. It was a Mechanics Bay, but it was a couple of thousand square feet, because I'm like, well, go big or go home. And so we set it up, and we decided we were going to open it from 6 in the morning till 11 at night. And I would go in the mornings to open it up, and we would rotate on who would go and close it. And I got to tell you, for the first, it must have been at least 2 months or so, I would literally, when I showed up at the prayer room, I would literally cuss my way through it the whole time. You know, things broken, things stolen, things out of place. My OCD's going crazy. It's just a mess. I just cussed through the prayer, opening up, cutting on lights, cursing. Just, I'm not going to lie, that's how it was between me. It's so frustrating. I'm like, this is ridiculous. I just felt like a janitor, just a mess. And discovering what new thing had gotten up and walked away from the prayer room. Oh, I don't want to do this anymore, Jesus. Well, I could have been a pastor. I was going in a direction here, and then you came and messed it all up for this silly idea of a prayer room. Because until he came and messed up my life, all I knew about prayer rooms were small, badly lit, uncomfortable furniture, huge Bible in front. That's it. And I'd gone on this weird adventure to set up something that, used all of my creativity and the staff to put together to try to match what he was trying to say. And it was just frustrating, incredibly. And so I admit, every single day, I cussed through opening up the prayer room and wanted to quit. Something happened in the back of the warehouse that the mechanics bay was in the front of the warehouse. Something happened in the back because the person that owned the large warehouse, he was renting out a bunch of spaces, and ours was toward the front. I don't know what happened in the back of the warehouse, but something, and the leaser came to us and he said, look, you got to keep bodies in here. We are asking everybody who's leasing space from us, you got to keep a person on site in your space during your open hours. Because we just came and opened the prayer room and then came and closed it, at night. So it took 30 days because it's a lot of hours. When we opened it back up, we had proper volunteer staff, and it was the staff who informed us of what was happening in between people stealing things and making a mess. It was the staff who gave us context for the mess and the stuff that got up and walked off. Because with people present, one or two people present, they could see that hardly anybody made it 8 feet into the room. That hardly anybody was able to just walk in and just go, oh, I think I'm going to sit here. They could see that God was taking people who walked through the door, whether it was old ladies, whether it was soccer moms, whether it was the 10-year-olds, riding their bikes into it, whether it was the homeless, or whether it was the transvestite prostitutes coming in to get, some free air conditioner, whether it was, a minister of the gospel. The staff could see that when people came into the space, that they were halted by some kind of presence. And that most of them began to sort of shake. And most of them ended up on the floor in their nice dresses and their, beautiful thing. It's staff that informed us that there would at times be 8 or 9 people just face to the floor just by the first 8 feet on the front of the door. Staff informed us that when they would crawl or somehow manage to get up and get actually in stations, it was staff that would tell us of the wailing and the weeping and the noises that were coming from the stations. It was staff that gave us context to say that, that the porn magazine that's at the cross, that's because a guy was giving his addiction over to God. The guns that we had to pick up, at the communal cross, that was because a gang member had come in and given his life to God and said that he wasn't going to do the gangs anymore. The pentagrams that were left, at the cross, that's because a Wiccan came in and felt a presence different than the presence they were used to living in. And the mess in the room, that's because God would be messing with people and, that just sort of get on their knees and furniture would fall, as they're trying to hold themselves up and asking, what is this? And, okay, now we had context for all the stuff I was cussing through. I was like, okay, my bad, God. My bad, Jesus. And while, my OCD still went crazy every time I would go and open the prayer room, I understood the holy work of tidying up behind God. We eventually learned a few things about how to secure anything that was valuable so that it wasn't a temptation. For those who are, live on the financial margins, we understood how to set up things so that they would hold steady if God was messing with the human hearts and cause their bodies to quake. I mean, we just sort of learned our lessons as we went along, how to set the stage, how to set the table for God to meet with, the whomsoever. We retrained staff to deal with that 8-foot rule. We trained staff to go around and, look for the odd things that people were giving to the Lord, 8-pack of condoms. It was just varied, wild and varied. And we came to find that beautiful and understand that there was a story attached to every single one of them. But word also got out because the tales that were coming from the prayer room as God was on the move were stunning. They were stunning, even the small ones. Even the, I've just never been able to hear from God. While I was here, I heard him whisper. He whispered something to me. Even just all different kinds. I'm not a Christian. I see that this is a Christian place, but my Muslim brothers and I, we come here every week for lunch because we just like they called it a presence of peace, the Muslims did. We just like the presence of peace that's here. And so even though we know it's a Christian thing, we just decided we're going to do our thingies here, which is, really cool because 2 among that group became followers of Christ. So, God was just having some fun in that old mechanics bay that we just took a sprayer and just sprayed everything one color and put some on-ramps into it. And now I'm going to take a pause here. Man, there's so much I want to say and so little time. But I want to take a pause here, and I was thinking about that guy Moses, who God had to do this fantastical thing that was going to result in the saving and the freeing of a nation. And instead of going, the way we saw God do in terms of just shaking the earth or shaking a mountain or sending a thunderous voice down from heaven, because this is a pivotal moment in human history, how he just set a blaze on fire off in the distance. I mean, just set ablaze some bush on fire off in the distance. This is how he was going to change human history. And you just have to imagine, how many times did Moses walk by? Can you see him going in the morning and saying, hey, there's a bush on fire, which was very common in that back part of that desert. Bushes caught fire all the time. They caught fire, they blazed out, and they blazed up, and then they blazed out. You can almost see Moses walking by it in the morning and say, hey, there's a bush on fire, and he's going about tending his herd. Can you see him coming back by in the afternoon hours as he's headed to grab lunch, and he notices, is that same bush on fire? I mean, who knows how many times he walked by it. Can you imagine him, getting ready to come home at the end of the day, and it's dusk now, and he looks over at the side of his eye, and he sees orange blaze from that same spot. It's like, is that the same? It's still on fire. Oh, I got to see about this. And the Bible language, it just describes a piqued curiosity. He says, hey, that's curious. I'm going to go check it out. This is what human history was hinged on. This bush off in the distance, not the loud Charlton Heston voice, which is what I would have gone with, for so important a thing. No, just a bush on fire off in the distance is how this played off. Piqued curiosity, stirred interest. I'm going to go check that out and see what that is. And when he drew near, God gave him an encounter with himself and with his calling in such a way that it set the trajectory for Moses and for people and resulted in us being here in this room now. Piqued curiosity, stirred interest, not shaking of mountains, not the vision of 1,000 crosses with Jesus hanging on, just low-key, stirred interest. And prayer rooms are like that. That no matter where you are spiritually, prayer rooms are set up to stir in curiosity, to pique curiosity. That each station is meant to be an on-ramp using normal people, non-churchy language, just everyday language, an on-ramp with opportunities to listen to music, to watch a DVD that tells a story, to engage in some interactive ancient and modern liturgy, to get your hands into tying things and touching things and gluing things and making things and sitting on things and throwing things, and piqued curiosity in imagery that you're in a prayer room, but you see a picture that doesn't seem very religious-y at all, and you just, what is that? And as you draw near, God just decides to turn that into an encounter of conversation and heart shift and change. This has been the commonality of this prayer movement, where God highlights prayer rooms and prayer births mission and justice. So there I was, no longer cussing my way through the prayer rooms. And I was reveling in the epic stories that the staff was able to be there to collect, as we retrained staff to know how to lead people to the Lord, even if it were stay with me now, even if it were people who called themselves pastors and ministers and faith leaders around the city. Because as word got out that God was on the move, church leaders would come and check it out as their church members were talking about, this weird place that they had gone to on the bad side of town. But what God was doing in their hearts, pastors do what pastors are supposed to do. They're like, let's go check this thing out and make sure it's legit. And although people could now walk into the prayer room, we're a year into this, people could now walk into the prayer room and God wouldn't mess them up until they got in a station or whatnot. If you were a pastor or ministry leader, God grandfathered in the old 8-foot rule. And those would be the ones that we'd see them start to shake at the front door, and the staff would go, oh, here's another ministry leader. I wonder if they're pastor, or what is this? And just watch them, eventually fall to their knees and get dirt on their really nice suits. And, eventually they respect that, eventually they'll respectfully just sort of slowly, try to be cool about it, get on their knees. You can see them resisting getting their forehead to the floor. But staff was like, that guy must be a minister. As word got out that the prayer room held unique calling to impact the hearts of those who did work in the sacred for a living, in ways to reorient their priorities, in words to orient them to soul care, in ways that help them to not relate to God largely as a means unto an end. We started discipleship among church leaders and ministry leaders in the city, at first by 2s and 5s and then by 10s, and eventually by hundreds, just beginning to speak into the lives of those who lead ministries. And so there really is, needless to say, something to prayer rooms. And that something is God in the midst of it. Here's the thing about our prayer room. I had agreed to do this prayer room for God, or whatever, to leave my day job as a pastor, that job I thought I'd be doing the rest of my life, and to do this thing. But I did not sign up for the things that it kept trying to birth. As people would hang their hat, they would just be regulars. that would just hang their hat. There were connections being made because there was a lot of living room type seatings. It wasn't just prayer stations. You could sit, you could bring your work, the students could bring their books and study. There was a nice environment. You just met different people from all walks of life. And, it was one space that a missionary could meet a student, could meet a pastor, could meet a homeless guy, could meet a transvestite pastor, could meet a transvestite prostitute, could meet. It was just unique. Could meet people who didn't know what they thought about God yet, to meet people who knew what they thought about God but would never darken the door of a church. Just a wide variety who felt a vibe around what was happening in the prayer room. And so community kept trying to get born as people would meet one another and begin to cultivate relationships. Hey, can we maybe have a Bible study here? Hey, can you guys offer something? Is it just a prayer room? Can you offer something to help us, answer these questions or help us, sort of move along, but with this kind of ethos where it's not so, strict and tight and whatever. Community kept trying to get born, and I was not finna trying to have it. I'm like, no, go somewhere else with that. It's a prayer room. Eventually, God had to wake me up rather startlingly one night and say, stop aborting this community that I'm trying to get born. Quit killing the community thing. And I relented and just let them be born. And eventually we created evenings, to respond to the type of hunger that was happening up in the prayer spaces. Evenings of worship, evenings of discipleship, evenings of prayer, workshops on, the spiritual disciplines, just responding to the people that had gotten born again in our spaces and the people that were just experiencing God in new ways, different from their sort of common church expression, and that this was the official way that they were going to be augmenting their faith journey. And we just responded and let communities of all different kinds just get born. We just let it happen. But the prayer space also birthed mission and justice as pastors came in and they asked questions and they sort of looked us up on the international thingy and saw that 24/7 prayer is a catalyst for movements of prayer, mission, and justice. And as they watched us, as we took students into the fragile inner city neighborhood right outside our door to do some good, to the homeless center right on the corner of the block, to go and take what God had given them in the prayer room and go and give it to the homeless community that met in the house where they could get coffee and clothing and things. I mean, prayer birthed mission and justice. Eventually, pastors would ask us, can you create something that would equip us to do mission in the margins? We just don't know how to do. We know how to send our kids, to other nations to do some good, but we want skill and grace to do missions in the margins, and we can see the impact that you've had in that margin of neighborhood that you're in. And so we created things, and churches just kept trying to give us their people to do some good, impart to their people what the ethos, the values that they had seen from coming down to the prayer room and talking with staff and seeing what was happening and coming to some things that we offered. And finally, I just it was this decision, all right, I want to take churches who are mad at each other, churches who are not speaking to each other, churches who they accuse each other's theology of being demonic, just those. I want to take about 4 or 5 of those and put them in the trenches together. And so I created this thing called the Justice Project, where we're going to adopt a fragile inner city neighborhood, the one right outside our prayer room door, the Justice Project. And for 9 months, we were going to work as if it all depended on us and pray as if it all depended on God and go and do some good in the neighborhood, that we were going to lead relationally. It wasn't going to be, the savior complex of the church coming in and, but whether we're going to lead relationally and take our cue from the residents. And while it's true, porches needed patching, holes in roofs needed patching, floors needed patching, kids, it was just a lot that community needed, but that we were going to lead relationally. that was going to be our priority. We're going to sit on porches with donuts and coffee and hear the stories and listen to God in terms of what our response would be. The truth is, realistically, bringing the Baptists and the Pentecostals and the skinny jean millennials and the traditional Lutherans together in a fragile inner city neighborhood, our faith level was at, Lord, don't let any of them get shot. That was our team's prayer, because drug dealers were openly dealing drugs on the street, and there were a couple of bona fide crack houses, not movie-type crack houses, actual crack houses in this. Our prayer was, don't let us lose one as we send, for the most part, 300 white people into this black neighborhood. Jesus, you gotta keep them alive. And so as these 300 white people from warring denominations had to do something they weren't used to, which was leading relationally. They had big hearts to serve, but it was easy to write a check or give a gift and, be done with it. But it's like, no, you got to get to know the family, the homeowners, their story, their kids, that your first gift is a gift of presence and a gift of listening, because this is going to be a mutual transformation. This isn't just about y'all 300 going in and transforming the neighborhood. They're going to transform you. This is a twofer God's trying to get out of it. And as they served in the trenches and patched porches and patched holes in walls and created after-school programs and created Bible studies in the neighborhood in weird times, because those were the times that if you're a single mother working 2 jobs, this was the only hour slot that you had that was convenient. And they created things to watch kids and talk to them about Jesus while they watched them. As they created, as they helped set up neighborhood association so that these fragile inner city neighborhoods could get some grants from the city, as they provided accounting skills and created skills groups where you could learn how to budget and learn how to they just went wild with all these varied skills that all of these 300 people had. They brought what they had and into this neighborhood to see if God could use it. And boy, God did. I don't have time to tell you all the stories of transformation in the neighborhood, but I will tell you this. Every neighborhood that we did a justice project in, nobody got shot. Those people who were of warring denominations developed relationship with one another. As they worked in the trenches together, they realized that doctrine wasn't what they were thinking about most days. Whether they agreed on doctrine wasn't what they were talking about most days. But how does God want to use us in this space, and what are we learning from the people in this neighborhood? And let's pray together and let's figure out how to resource this thing that God said that He would allow us to do in service for them. There are long-standing relationships that are still going on because of working in the trenches. Just the unheard of, the Pentecostal and the Baptist, the lion and the lamb. Doing the Justice Project. Every neighborhood that we went into, because we chose fragile inner city neighborhoods. Everyone that we took warring denominations into with us, by the time we left, when the next quality of life study came out, the neighborhood was listed as no longer fragile, but as stabilizing. Go figure. Eventually, word got out that, this silly little thing called 24/7, they got this weird sort of goofy space, and people seem to be collecting around it, and they're doing this justice thing, and we keep hearing stories around the justice thing. Eventually, word got out, and the police came to us and said, "Hey, would you?" We saw what you're doing. We're experiencing the work of it. I mean, we're in the neighborhoods you're in, we're usually in those neighborhoods 12 times a day. And we noticed in each of the neighborhoods, we were called in less. It was less violence. We were actually able to take down a drug ring in that that was on that neighborhood that our prayer room was in. We were actually able to take down a drug ring, something we had been trying to do, they said, for 5 years. And in this neighborhood, the same thing happened, and we were noticing we were called on less and less and less, and we were able to actually sort of pull the thread on a human trafficking hold that they had in the neighborhood. We were able to find out where the house was and shut it down. And then in this one too, and so just a couple of police officers, they just showed up and said, "Hey, who runs this place? We need to talk to y'all." And I'm like, and they told us of all of this, and they said, "Can we pick the neighborhood you go to next?" I don't know how you all do, you church people, whatever, I don't know how you all do it, but, it'd be great if you could, do it in this neighborhood right over here. I don't know how it was that, I went from some dirty mechanics bay to being in the mayor's office, talking to him about how to flip neighborhoods and talking to him about how to involve the city in helping to put an end or at least a dent in human trafficking. I don't know how we were just working as if it all depended on us and praying as if it all depended on God and praying we would not get dead. That was really the bulk of our theology at that time, all green behind the ears, making all kind of mistakes, but God bless him, he was for us. And he put up, those bowling guardrails so that, even if we didn't get a strike every time, we weren't going to do any bad permanent damage. He just guardrailed the thing and blessed the work. The prayer room birthed mission and justice. It birthed communities. It birthed a safe space for people who would never walk in the door of a church, but who would walk in a prayer room and find community and learning and apprenticeship as staff took them under their wings and as other leaders who hung their hat in the prayer room took them under their wing, and it was good, and it still is good. That was in 2005. In 2023, the prayer room in Charlotte is still going strong, still spinning out stories of God on the move in the same way as in the early days. It has been tested, and it has been proven tried and true. Mission organizations, they talk about unreached people groups, people who haven't heard the gospel of Jesus yet. But, regarding the church is an unreached people group. The church is an unreached people group in the area of prayer. We are, according to the head of the church, one of our defining characteristics as individuals and as a body is that we would be people of prayer, that our collectives would be houses of prayer, that among the other things, many other things God would call us to as individuals and as a collective, one of the defining traits would be people of prayer and houses of prayer. And yet, that's one of the things that prayer is boring. Prayer meetings are the least attended. Pray for more than 10 minutes. After you've done your prayer list, what else is it? And I know you guys have been fathered and pastored in this house well, and that you don't share those same tendencies, but there is a reality to this identity that God has given us to be people of prayer and houses of prayer collectively. And so when we think about that as our core identity in Christ, I don't know, we really just need to figure out why. Why was, of all the things God could have said they would be known as people of, there's a lot of good choices. People of mission, people of justice, there's just a lot of good choices. People of holiness, there's a bunch of choices. Prayer? Really, God? Prayer. You had, your one chance to make this vision statement, to make this sticky thing, this communicating this big idea, and you talk about that your people are going to be known as, and you end it with prayer. I'd rather you said, no, my people are going to be known as badasses because they're going to take down the devil and they're going to stomp on the devil's thingy. What were you thinking with prayer? I just would have gone a different way with it, is all I'm saying. Yeah, definitely more militant. But for God, prayer is the most revolutionary aspect of the human beings that he made and the purpose that he made them. And while I certainly would have preferred demon slayer and, sword shielder or, some great thing, world changer, I think he knew what he was doing when he chose this word prayer that hardly anybody gets excited about, his own people included. Because if you think about it, it's 11:36. How much time have I got? 10 more minutes? 5 more minutes? Yeah, we're going to go over a little bit. Because when you think about it, really, what was God thinking? He had it good. He literally had it perfect. He set up his home in the heavens, in the heart of the universe. For his artwork, he casted lights in the sky that we know as planets, just the beauty and the array of them to light up the night sky. He had perfection. I mean, think about it. Oh, you guys in the room, you'll relate to this idea. I mean, God had his perfect man cave. He really did. He had a big flat screen TV or his version of it that would show him all the activity of the heavens. Just the 24-hour channel, although there's no time in that, but just going all the time, just displaying the best of what was going on in the universe that he made. He had literally perfect servants, arrayed in beauty, waiting for him to utter his every need and desire so that they could quickly do it in such a way that labeled as perfect. He didn't have to go behind them. He didn't have to go check their work. He didn't have to remind them 14 times. When he thought and desired a thing, they went after it. Literally perfect servants. He had crafted his perfect man cave. And can you imagine, you guys have done man caves and girl caves. Can you imagine finally putting the last tchotchke in place? Cutting up the stereo that, really just gave him access to the heavenly choir that was happening in the room next to him. But, he could work the bass and the treble the way he likes. But so he had this heavenly music piped in, this flat screen TV to see what was happening in the universe, these perfect servants that stood around the room just waiting to respond to his every beck and call. He puts the last tchotchke in place of his man cave, and he finally sits down on his version of a lazy boy, Bible calls it a throne, and just, finally sits down and hopes for, and we wait for that. That sensation when you're done setting up your man cave. You sit down in your lazy boy, remote in hand, angelic music coming from the other room, servants, and you're waiting for that. And God sits down in his lazy boy throne, and instead of feeling, he feels something that the response is, surrounded by all that perfection. Now, God's taste is not like mine. He likes it gaudy. He likes the jewels and the Baroque and the gold and the silvers. He likes it gaudy. There's no accounting for taste. But everything is perfect, and it's just as he likes it. And he sits down, and instead of feeling satisfied, he feels something is missing. And that's when the thought of us, if you and I were born in his heart, is there surrounded by perfection. The thought of imperfect, broken people set in the context of an imperfect, broken world, given the freedom of choice, knowing that it was going to mean that they would make imperfect, broken choices, which means he would have to sing for his supper. He would have to earn our trust. He would have to cultivate and woo us. He would have to convince us to entrust him and to let him into our lives. This imperfectness was born as he sat down and went, huh. And as he searched to find out what that was, to discover he had the heart of a father. He wanted to have children and raise a family and apprentice and grow them. And now God had to want you in the red shirt and you in the orange shirt and you kids on the couch and the flag swayers and the preacher. And he had to want it pretty bad, because he knew that in giving us free choice, that was going to result in wars and famine, genocide, that it was going to result in Holocaust and terrible viruses taking out hundreds of thousands, that it was going to result in murders and rapes and pedophiles and human trafficking rings. He knew it was going to result in spousal abuse and all manner of terrible things. How bad did he have to want what's sitting in this room? How bad did he have to want it that even though he knew all the collateral damage that was going to come with it, that he still pressed start on human history? And the first purpose, the first reason that he created us was to answer the longing in his heart. A longing to be invited into the beautiful, messy, everyday lives of imperfect people in an imperfect world, that we were going to be his soap operas, that we were going to be his sons and his daughters, that he was going to have to work to earn our trust and work to shape us, that this was going to be like no experience he and his two buddies, the Word and the Spirit, had ever had. It was going to be stretch them more than they'd ever been stretched and give them more joy than they ever had. This was going to be wild, and they had to decide whether they were going to be all in or not. And they no, yeah, but because they understood that the first and primary purpose, the reason why humans were born, was to answer God's heart. And God has always been faithful to tell you exactly what he wanted. Now, people are broken and jacked up, myself included. You and I know what this world is like. If we were going to highlight two commandments, the first one would be, well, if I were God, the first one would be, thou shalt obey me. Let's just get that clear. But the running really importantly is this idea of, oh my God, you guys are going to ruin one another. Let's make the first commandment love one another. We know how important that is. But the first commandment wasn't thou shalt obey me, which it should have been. And the first commandment wasn't thou shalt love me, which all y'all know how important that is. But rather he comes right out and tells us this is the primary reason I made you. It's not the only reason, but it's the primary one. And he describes it like this. All right, this was what I want your priority to be. Love me. And love me like this, with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That first commandment speaks to our calling to answer the desire of God's heart. Before we get to that second one, he says this is the primary one. So what does that mean in terms of its relationship with prayer as I bring this thing home? It means that our primary calling isn't service to the lost or service to the broken or those on the margins. Our primary calling isn't to be a part of faith community, hugely important, not the primary one. That our primary calling isn't to, and the list goes on, isn't service to the King, but rather our primary calling is to companion this King. And this is why prayer is the defining characteristic. Because if that's our primary calling, not our only one, but the one that he wants to keep at the forefront, then prayer is going to be the conduit that holds all of our communion and communication with God. It's going to hold that as we cultivate personal relationship, as we invite God into the beautiful messiness and the mundane of our lives and ask for his input, ask for his presence, ask for his wisdom. He's the smartest guy in any room he walks in, to ask what he thinks about things. To tell us the kind of day we had, the bad day that we had, and to allow him to just listen or to offer input or to bring some shift or it holds all of that which touches the thing that God said he wanted. He wanted to be involved in the messy and the high and the mundane. He wanted us to talk to him about all of that stuff. All of the communion and communication was going to be held largely in the context of that thing called prayer, in order to be able to answer the desire of God's heart, and in order to be able to, as we partner with God, to go and begin to do work in a messy, broken world, that prayer was going to be one of the primary conduits of resource and empowerment to partner with God to go and do good in the world. So you can see why, if you're Lucifer and you want to work smart and not hard, you want to take the legs out of prayer from the church right from the get-go. You want them to think about prayer as boring, as something you only do for 10 minutes, as something that's just a list you go through. You don't want them to think about prayer in the context of companioning God, companioning the King, of cultivating relationship with this person who is the most beautiful, most perfect, most smart, just a good guy. He's just a good, funny, and he's funny. Oh, I could go on. And now we're in this season, in this generation where God is wanting to push back and confront the harm the enemy has done in the body of Christ concerning prayer, to breathe new life in it, even if he has to create movements that create spaces that are just good at piquing your curiosity, stirring your curiosity, that are just good at drawing you to back to a place that you had already judged as boring, or you thought you knew what it was about, and there was no new way it could surprise you. That he says, no, I'm going to help you with this, because your defining characteristic should be a people of prayer, a house of prayer. Because if we take the first commandment seriously, then what it means is, when Jesus talked about what it looked like in his splash of red in John, he talked about it in a horticultural language. He said, I'm the vine, you are the branch. And he's talking about people who would be understood their calling to companion the King, closeness, abiding, that's connection. He says, if you'll understand this and stay close to me, I'll be able to resource you from below to pull off all that stuff that I talked about in the Beatitudes. That it wouldn't be something I commanded you to do, but rather it would be like a brochure as me telling you, what God can do in the life of somebody who's taken their first calling is to companion the King, to abide, to just stay connected. Talk about the resources that he could resource them with in righteousness and peace that passes understanding and joy unspeakable, and take them on missional adventures in the world, not because they're super spiritual, but just because they're connected. So profound is this connection, communion piece. So profound that it comes with an open-ended check. He said, look, if you'll make this your priority because you understand your primary calling, and you'll invest in inviting the word in your life. You ask what you will, and it shall be done. If there's anybody else making that kind of promise, we'd call them a liar. But it's Jesus who had the unmitigated gall to say, no, if you get this part right, ask what you will, and it shall be done. Prayer. So, in closing, if anyone here needs to go from prayer hobby to prayer habit to prayer life, if anyone here wants to take where they've cultivated their prayer life so far, and invite God to give a reorientation or a reshift to it that aligns it so that it fulfills these extraordinary purposes in helping you companion this king, and that it fulfills this purpose of understanding he actually wants to hear about your boring day. It fascinates him. You fascinate him. Wants to hear all of it. The highs and the lows of you. He paid a big price to be able to have that happen. And there's a lot of collateral damage to make that still be possible. And he's still courting us. Won't you come near? If you'll share your beautiful, messy life with me, I'll share my life with you. And it is the power of an endless life. And it has the resources to fulfill those big promises of Jesus, of peace that passes and joy unspeakable, and all those absurd promises that feel like they're just for the people that are perfect. If you feel like that you want to invite God to help you take your prayer life up a notch and move in the direction of, and whatsoever you ask, it shall be done. Knowing that the things that you're going to ask in that space, a lot of it's going to look like, God, show me your heart. Your heart is my promised land. Show me. Unless, give me the good parking spot. He wants to give you the good parking spot. Don't stop asking for that. If you want a reorientation in your prayer life, to shift more in this direction, that's the first thing. And the second thing, if you feel like you want to take God up on his offer, that if you'll prioritize that first commandment, that if you want to make a shift in how you're relating to God and you're willing to say yes to this primary calling to companion him, if that's something that God is stirring in your heart, yes, I have a relationship with God, I've known him, we've grown or whatnot, but I admit my primary calling hasn't been to companion him. I've been more like Martha than Mary, even though I have times of Mary. My priority hasn't been to companion him. My prayer life is decent, but it's not all that. Those two things. If either of those resonate with you, I'd like you to stand. Because the presence of the Lord here is present to make that orientation, to make that shift. And so if you are wanting God to realign this thing called prayer in your life, if you want to give him permission to move you in the direction that a year from now, 2 years from now, people who know you, have encountered you, will be able to say, there's many great things about him or her, but one of the defining characteristics is that they are a person of prayer. And I pray that you would open both your hands so that like both your palms upward to God, if that's you, and you want to up your game on your prayer life. Father, I pray for those people with open palms and open hands upward towards you. I pray that you would indeed break into their current prayer lives and establish the culture of heaven. I pray that you would begin to court and woo them and draw them into a place of prayer in fresh new ways, and that you would meet them there in fresh new ways. I pray that you would give them a revelation of the power and what's happening behind the scenes in their feeble whispered prayers, even the ones that have doubt attached to them. A revelation of the power of prayer in its relationship with you, in its relationship with the world. Father, push reset on their prayer lives. And then finally, for those of you who are ready to take the big leap, say, yeah, I want this new priority. That I have had many godly priorities in my life, and the things on my list right now, they are godly, right priorities, but I'm going to allow God to take this love me, companion me priority, to move that thing all the way up to number one in my life. For those people who are saying yes to that, to answer the call to companion the King, Father, I pray that you would receive their yes, and that you would begin to show them how to walk with you in ways that are focused on your delight and your pleasure, in ways that are focused on giving you revival before we ask you to give us one, in ways that will allow you to show them who you really are. And in seeing that, they will become like you. Father, receive their yes. Position them in their hearts to prioritize your company, your companionship. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you.